What happens when rulers who build their power on fear suddenly feel fear moving toward them? What happens when the message is not a speech, not a warning, but a sky full of precision fire? Before we step into the smoke, tap like for clear thinking, subscribe for calm analysis, and share this with one person who wants the real story behind the noise. Tonight, that story is not just about explosions on a dark coastline. It is about a regime discovering that its favorite weapon, controlled chaos, can turn against it. For years, Iran's ruling clerics and their military enforcers have pushed the region to the edge, then stepped back and smiled as everyone else paid the price. But this time, according to reports and imagery released from the region, the U.S. military answered with scale, speed, and a message Tehran could not ignore tonight. Not this time either. The numbers alone tell part of the story. Over 2 nights, U.S. forces reportedly struck 170 Iranian military targets, with roughly 80 hit during the first wave and about 90 in the second. That is not a warning shot. That is a campaign. The targets described were not random buildings chosen to create headlines. They were pieces of a system. Coastal radar sites, drone launch points, missile storage areas, naval facilities, air defense positions, and command locations tied to Iran's ability to threaten ships. If these reports are accurate, the goal was simple and severe. Take away the tools Iran uses to bully the waterway, then make every commander wonder what asset disappears next. That is why the panic matters. Panic is not always soldiers running in the streets. Sometimes panic is a phone call made, too late, from a bunker, by men who thought the world would blink first. To understand the pressure, you have to understand the map. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow, crowded, and vital. A major share of the world's oil passes through that strip of water, squeezed between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Every tanker moving there carries more than fuel. It carries prices at gas stations, shipping costs, factory schedules, and the confidence of markets far away from the Gulf. Iran knows this. Its leaders have treated the strait like a lever. They can pull whenever their power is challenged. They do not need to defeat the United States Navy in open battle. They only need to make insurers nervous, captains cautious, and governments afraid of a wider war. That is the old game. Threaten the flow, deny responsibility, blame America, then wait for diplomats to reward the behavior with another temporary pause. This time, the pause appears to be gone for now. The immediate trigger was the reported attack on commercial vessels near the strait. 3 ships were hit or threatened, according to accounts from the region, after Tehran had claimed it would not interfere with civilian shipping. That promise did not last. Drones and missiles appeared, the usual denials followed, and Iranian state outlets pushed the familiar line that the ships had ignored warnings. This is how Grayzone aggression works. It is violence wrapped in fog. Nobody signs the attack order on camera. Nobody says, yes, we did it. Instead, the regime creates danger, watches the world argue over proof, and uses the delay to prepare the next move. But the American answer suggests Washington decided the pattern itself was proof enough. Not proof for a courtroom maybe, but proof for deterrence. The response said, if you touch shipping, your military network pays before your excuses even land anywhere publicly. This is the heart of the conflict. Iran's rulers want the benefits of war without the full cost of war. They want drones in the air, mines in the water, militias in the shadows, and negotiators on the phone, all at the same time. They want to threaten Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Europe, and the United States, while still presenting themselves as the injured party. That strategy works only when opponents are scared of escalation more than Tehran is scared of punishment. The moment that balance changes, the whole performance begins to crack. A regime built on bluff can look strong for a long time. It can parade missiles, chant slogans, and promise revenge. But strength is not noise. Strength is what remains when the other side stops listening to threats and starts removing capabilities. That is the pressure now, closing around Tehran from every direction at once. Look at their reported target list through that lens. Coastal radars are not symbolic. They help track ships and aircraft. Missile batteries are not symbolic. They threaten bases, ports, and tankers. Drone launch sites are not symbolic. They are the starting point for attacks that can hit apartment blocks or airport runways hundreds of miles away. Naval command posts are not symbolic. They connect orders, boats, sensors, and weapons into one dangerous chain. When those nodes are struck together, the message is larger than any single blast. It says your network has been mapped. It says your hiding places are not as hidden as you believed. It says the next escalation will not be answered with a press release. It will be answered by breaking the machinery that made the escalation possible. That is why this was not random destruction. It was a deliberate narrowing of choices for Iran's commanders. Now, people naturally want to know what aircraft or ships carried out the strikes. Reports point toward a mix of American power that may include strike fighters from regional bases, carrier-based aircraft, long-range missiles from naval vessels, and remotely piloted aircraft watching or engaging certain targets. The exact package has not been fully confirmed in public, and that uncertainty is part of the pressure. A commander in Iran does not get to know whether the next weapon comes from a fighter, a destroyer, a submarine, or a drone he never saw. What matters is the architecture. One layer finds, another layer blinds. Another layer strikes. Another layer watches the aftermath. Modern American military power is not only about a single jet dropping a single bomb, it is about systems working together faster than the enemy can adapt under stress. That speed is what creates panic inside command rooms. Iran's response also tells us something important. Publicly, officials used hard language. They accused America of aggression. They warned that punishment was coming. They claimed they were defending sovereignty. But on the ground, the reported retaliation looks like the old playbook again. Drones and missiles aimed toward Gulf partners, with civilian areas placed in danger. That contrast matters. If you claim to be striking military power, but your weapons threaten residential towers, airports, hotels, and neighborhoods, you are not sending a military message. You are trying to frighten ordinary people into political pressure. It is hostage logic at regional scale. Tehran understands that Gulf capitals are filled with workers, families, pilots, nurses, teachers, and children from many countries. Fear spreads quickly in such places. The regime counts on that fear reaching leaders faster than missiles reach launch sites. That is why civilians become targets in its strategy again and again. And inside Iran, panic has another shape. It is not just fear of bombs. It is fear of blame. When a powerful security state suffers a major strike campaign, everyone begins asking who failed. Who allowed the radars to be found? Who left drones exposed? Who promised the leadership that America would not respond? Who said that shipping attacks would be low risk? In systems like Iran's, truth does not move freely. Bad news is softened as it climbs upward because nobody wants to anger the men above them. So leaders often make decisions based on lies they created themselves. Then the explosions arrive, and suddenly every general, minister, and cleric looks for someone else to sacrifice. That internal suspicion can be more dangerous than any outside speech. It turns command meetings into survival contests, and survival contests lead to mistakes. Mistakes are how regional crises become wars very quickly. The economic side adds another layer. Alongside the military pressure, Washington reportedly moved to cut or tighten Iran's remaining legal oil revenue channels. That matters because missiles, drones, patronage networks, and internal repression all cost money. The top of the regime may live behind walls and speak in sacred language, but the system underneath runs on cash. Oil sales fund security forces. Security forces protect the ruling circle. The ruling circle uses ideology to justify the machine. When revenue shrinks, loyalty becomes more expensive and fear becomes harder to manage. Iran can still smuggle. It can still use middlemen. It can still sell through shadows. But shadows charge a price. Every discount, every hidden transfer, every delayed payment weakens the regime's room to maneuver. Military strikes remove hardware. Sanctions squeeze oxygen. Together, they tell Tehran that the cost curve has changed, and that message lands inside every ministry in Tehran. If this breakdown is helping you see past the headlines, do one small thing right now. Light up the like button, join the channel, and send this video to someone who thinks geopolitics is too confusing to follow. The wider diplomatic picture is just as important. Gulf states do not want a major war on their doorstep. Europe does not want energy panic. Asian economies do not want tankers delayed. NATO members do not want a precedent where a regime can shake global shipping and then bargain from the smoke. That is why American action, when framed around keeping waterways open, can gather quiet support even from governments that dislike conflict. The issue is bigger than Washington and Tehran. It is about whether international trade lanes are protected by rules or held hostage by whoever has the nearest missile battery and the least shame. That question now feels immediate again. This is also why the language around the strikes matters. The United States is not saying it wants to conquer Iran. It is not saying every problem can be solved by force. The stated purpose is narrower. Stop attacks on shipping, reduce threats to regional partners, and restore deterrence. Deterrence is a cold word, but the idea is simple. It means making aggression look less attractive than restraint. If Tehran believes it can launch drones, close waterways, and suffer only statements, it will keep testing. If it believes each test destroys valuable military assets, the calculation changes. That does not guarantee peace. Nothing does. But it forces leaders who love risk with other people's lives to feel risk in their own system. In a dangerous region, that difference can decide whether a crisis cools or burns. And every capital nearby understands the stakes tonight with unusual clarity and concern now. We should also separate the Iranian people from the men who rule over them. Millions of Iranians did not choose to spend their future on missile programs, foreign militias, and confrontations at sea. They want jobs, dignity, normal travel, clean air, honest courts, and a life where their children are not used as shields for slogans. When the regime escalates, ordinary Iranians pay in inflation, isolation, and fear. When foreign powers strike military sites, ordinary Iranians still worry about what comes next. That is the tragedy the ruling clerics exploit. They wrap themselves in the nation, then act like any strike on their war machine is a strike on every Iranian family. It is not. A government is not a civilization. A regime is not a people. The panic in Tehran's elite does not mean joy in Iran's streets. It means another hard night for everyone, watching and waiting anxiously. Geography explains why the reported second wave felt so serious. Strikes were said to stretch across multiple coastal areas, including places linked to Iran's naval reach and maritime logistics. Bandar Abbas matters because it sits near the strait and hosts major naval activity. Chabahar matters because it gives Iran access to the Indian Ocean beyond Hormuz. Other coastal nodes matter because they can support radars, missile teams, drones, patrol boats, and supply routes. If you only hit one site, Tehran can shift pressure elsewhere. If you hit the network across the coastline, every fallback option begins to look fragile. That is the difference between swatting at symptoms and attacking the system. The geography sends its own message. This is not just about one narrow passage. It is about Iran's entire ability to weaponize the sea. And that ability is central to its regional blackmail strategy when other tools fail badly. Think of Iran's military pressure like a chain. A boat needs fuel, orders, crews, sensors, weapons, and a place to hide. A missile team needs radar cues, communication links, launch vehicles, maintenance and command approval. A drone unit needs storage, operators' guidance, and safe launch areas. Break one link, and the unit limps. Break many links at once, and commanders are forced to improvise under fear. That is when mistakes happen. Boats stay in port. Radars switch off to survive. Missile crews move instead of launch. Drone teams wonder if the vehicle they prepare is already being watched. This is the hidden power of precision strikes. The visible explosion lasts seconds. The invisible effect lasts much longer because every surviving unit must ask a terrifying question. Did they miss us, or are they saving us for later? That uncertainty eats discipline from the inside, slowly, quietly, and constantly every hour. Still, this moment is dangerous. Anyone pretending otherwise is selling fantasy. Iran can miscalculate. The United States can be drawn deeper than planned. A drone can hit the wrong building. A missile can kill civilians. A commander can act before politicians decide. Escalation is not a staircase people climb calmly. It is often a dark room filled with tripwires. That is why discipline matters as much as power. The purpose of a hard response should not be revenge for television. It should be to create a path back to restraint. But restraint only works when the aggressive side believes restraint is better than the alternative. The challenge for Washington is to hit hard enough to restore deterrence, but not so blindly that Tehran sees no exit. A cornered regime can become reckless, especially when pride is tied to survival. That is the thin line now being walked by all sides. Then comes the strangest part. Reports of Iranian contacts seeking a deal while threats were still flying. That is classic pressure politics. Tehran wants to show defiance to its supporters and flexibility to its enemies, hoping both audiences believe the version meant for them. One hand waves the flag, the other reaches for the phone. The problem is credibility. A deal is only useful if the person offering it can enforce it. Who speaks for Iran right now? The clerical leadership, the Revolutionary Guard, the parliament speaker, the security councils behind closed doors. When power is unclear, diplomacy becomes harder because a promise from one faction may be sabotage fuel for another. The United States cannot make a lasting arrangement with a voice that cannot control the launchers. That uncertainty may be the deepest panic of all. It means the regime may not fully trust itself in this crisis anymore. That helps explain the loud public accusations. When regimes are confident, they do not need to scream every sentence. When they are shaken, they flood the air with moral language, insults, and vows of revenge. Calling an opponent evil is easy. Explaining why your own forces threatened commercial shipping is harder. Calling strikes a crime is easy. Explaining why your drones end up near civilian areas is harder. The audience for this language is not only the world, it is also the domestic base, the security services, and frightened elites who need reassurance that the leadership is still in control. Propaganda is not just persuasion, it is emotional damage control. It tells loyalists, do not look at the burning sites, listen to the slogans. But smoke has a way of making slogans feel smaller. And after 170 reported targets, there's a lot of smoke for everyone to notice now. For the Gulf states, this is not an abstract chessboard. Imagine being in Manama, Doha, or Kuwait City and hearing warnings about incoming drones. Imagine working at an airport while crews check the sky. Imagine living in a tower with your Family, wondering whether a weapon aimed in anger will miss whatever target its operators claimed. That is the human side of regional deterrence. These countries host bases, trade routes, energy infrastructure, and millions of civilians from across the world. Iran uses that density as leverage. It hopes fear will split the coalition, but attacks on civilians often do the opposite. They remind hesitant governments why the threat cannot be ignored. A regime that endangers neighborhoods to answer strikes on military sites reveals its priorities. It is not defending justice. It is trying to export insecurity until everyone else begs for quiet. That is not strength. It is extortion, plainly. The timing also fits a larger global lesson. From Ukraine to the Red Sea to the Gulf, relatively cheap drones and missiles are changing how states create danger. A small weapon can force a huge response. A drone that costs far less than a fighter jet can threaten a tanker worth millions and cargo worth more. That creates temptation for regimes and militias. They think they can impose costs cheaply, but the answer we are seeing is that cheap attacks can invite expensive consequences. Once a great power decides the pattern must stop, the launchers, radars, warehouses, and commanders behind those attacks become targets. The age of drones is not only an age of offense, it is an age of traceability. Sensors watch, satellites compare, networks listen, patterns emerge, and eventually the weapon that was supposed to be deniable points back home. That is a frightening lesson for Tehran tonight. If you are still watching, you are the reason deep analysis survives online, so hit like as a signal flare. Subscribe for the next briefing, and share this before the spin machines bury the facts. So what happens next? There are three broad paths. The first is controlled retreat. Iran could reduce attacks on shipping, lower the temperature, and search for a deal that lets it claim dignity at home. This would not mean friendship, it would mean survival math. The second path is indirect escalation. Tehran could lean on proxies, cyber pressure, or more deniable strikes, hoping to hurt American partners without inviting another large response. The third path is open escalation, the most dangerous option, where Iran tries to prove it cannot be intimidated. That path may satisfy hardliners for a day, then leave them with fewer systems, fewer options, and more fear than they had before again. The first path is the one rational leaders would choose. Stop threatening the waterway, accept inspections or monitoring, and take the off-ramp before more assets vanish. But rational does not always win in revolutionary systems. Hardliners fear looking weak more than they fear economic pain, because weakness can invite rivals inside the regime. The second path, proxy escalation, is more likely because it preserves the habit of denial. A militia fires, a drone appears, a cyber incident happens. Tehran shrugs and asks for evidence. But after this strike campaign, the room for denial may be smaller. Washington can say the source pattern is clear and punish the sponsor. The third path, direct confrontation, would be the gamble of men who mistake slogans for air defense. It could trigger days or weeks of strikes that Iran is not built to absorb. That is why panic can produce caution or catastrophe. It is important not to cheer war like a game. Real people live under these skies. Real sailors cross those waters. Real families hear sirens. A good analysis should be clear-eyed, not bloodthirsty. But being serious about peace also means being honest about aggression. If a regime learns that threatening civilians creates rewards, more civilians will be threatened. If shipping lanes become bargaining chips for armed clerics and commanders, every country pays. Peace is not just the absence of bombs. Peace is a system of expectations. It requires that borders, waterways, embassies, and civilian neighborhoods are not treated as toys by men seeking leverage. Diplomacy matters, but diplomacy without consequences can become permission. Consequences without diplomacy can become a spiral. The hard task is to combine pressure with an exit, force with purpose, and clarity with restraint. That is the space where statesmanship either lives or dies right now. So why are Iran's rulers in panic? Not because one night of strikes ends the story. It does not. They are in panic because the rules they relied on are being challenged. They believe they could threaten global trade and hide behind ambiguity. They believe civilian fear would protect military assets. They believe loud words would cover weak positions. They believed negotiation and intimidation could move together forever. Now they are facing a different message. The waterway stays open, partners are not abandoned, and every act of coercion can carry a price. The coming days will show whether Tehran chooses survival or escalation. But one thing has already changed. The fear is no longer moving in only one direction. For years, the regime tried to make the region wonder what Iran might do next. Now Iran's rulers must wonder what America already knows. That is real panic inside a palace.